What's up, everyone? Welcome to another week of First Seed Fantasy. We are here to chat fantasy football in the upcoming 2023 season. I am your co-host, Kyle Krajewski, joined by my lovely, as always, every week, Zach Cole. Zach, what's up this week?
I think the pinnacle of my week is you calling me lovely every single week. I appreciate that, man.
It's easy to say because you are a lovely man.
Thank you, brother. I'm doing good. I mean, we're here to talk about fantasy again. It's always a good time when we're doing that, and we've got some. It's getting real with our topic today. We're kind of taking a look ahead into this upcoming season, and it's really starting to get real. So I'm excited for it. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to have a good conversation with you.
Yes, and you're right. It's getting very real. We are mid-June now, and the season is slowly but surely making its way towards us. But before we get into the topics of today, we are First Seed Fantasy. You can find us on all socials: Instagram, Twitter, I think even TikTok. First Seed Fantasy, although I think TikTok's First Seed Sports, but First Seed Fantasy. Find us on Instagram and Twitter primarily, and then YouTube. If you are listening to us, you can find us on YouTube, First Seed Fantasy, or if you are watching us, you can find us in podcast form,
Mhm.
wherever you get your podcast, that First Seed Fantasy. So once you do all that, find us, search us, follow, like, subscribe. Then we can get into today's topic, which is I guess the pinnacle, or like the start of the summer, pretty much. And it's our fantasy rankings and kind of an early look, I should say. These aren't concrete. They're never concrete, but just an early, we gave a look at the list, and we're going to run through our initial top tens for draft season, for draft fantasy football rankings. And again, not concrete. We are not like stamping this down as like, we're not publishing this as like, you can't look at this. This is just us discussing just an early look, like just looking at without even diving into the numbers. Just like, all right, this is how I'm feeling about these guys. And then I think coming up in the next few weeks, we'll actually dive into our projections and give our projections and rankings based off of those. But right now, this is just early look, top tens at the top four positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. Um, just giving that initial look.
Yeah, it's just kind of our very first look at these situations and taking a look at who we like, who's in good situations, who we think is going to build off of last year's success, continue last year's success, all the above. And Kyle, like you mentioned, we'll be doing our projections coming up here. So once we kind of get a little more in depth of a look at these guys' stats and what we think they're going to do this year, that'll give us a little more finite and kind of number driven analysis of who we have in our top 10 and who we like. But I'm going to guess the top 10 is going to remain pretty close, pretty similar to what we have here, just off of our knee jerk reactions. So there might be a couple guys that surprise us, hop up the list a little bit, but I think the top 10 is a pretty prestigious group to be in. And I think that this group of guys that we have is probably going to be pretty close to what we're looking at when we stat everyone out.
Yeah, I think even if we scoped it out, like, and we're just like, all right, these are our top 15, I bet those top 15 guys are going to be the same 15 guys that rotate in and out of our top 10s. But just kind of giving you a top 10 list here, just it's mid June. Just kind of giving an initial thoughts on some of these players going into, I guess, mini draft season where some are technically starting, but it's mostly best ball season. But we'll kind of like grow on these top tens as the summer continues.
I think that's a perfect point. Let's get into them.
Let's get into them. We are going to start out with quarterbacks, and I think we're just going to do five and then five. So I'm going to kick Zach off and have him kind of go down from 10 to 6, and then we'll discuss the next five of basically go from there.
All right. Well, I like you said, Kyle, we're going to start off with number 10 here. And number 10 for me is a guy that I'm expecting to have a bounce back from last season. We saw him coming off of a full year of missed football into a suspension, into just a weird situation. Didn't really ever look like himself. And that's Deshaun Watson, quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. I love Deshaun's situation this year. I think he has a better offense now that they've brought in Elijah Moore. I think that he's going to be able to focus less on having to distribute the ball to Kareem Hunt in the check down pass game. He's kind of got the true bona fide back with Nick Chubb. He's got his receivers in Cooper and Elijah Moore and Donovan Peoples-Jones. He's got a great tight end, David Njoku. I love this as him to be one of the biggest risers in this offseason in quarterback play from last season to this season. So he's my number 10 ranking. What do you think? What do you make of him this year, Kyle?
It's an interesting situation. I think it's an offense that has definitely improved. I mean, with the addition of Elijah Moore, and I think it's becoming a more well-rounded offense. You've got another year in the system. He can finally be a full participant of the team. I'm definitely expecting a bounce back season. And for myself, he's not in my top 10, but a guy who, again, is floating right there. And wouldn't be surprised if he made his way up there.
Yeah, and one other guy, just real quick, that I want to throw out, who I was mental battling between he and Deshaun Watson here was Tua. I love Tua for this upcoming season. Tua Tagovailoa, the quarterback for the Dolphins, but he just didn't quite make the list. So that's just another name I wanted to throw in there. But moving on to number 9, I have Aaron Rodgers, quarterback for the now New York Jets this upcoming season. I think Rodgers is poised to really settle into this offense and make a huge impact, if nothing else, just based on the talent that he has surrounding him in New York now. Obviously, the storyline in Green Bay was that they weren't ever helping him out. They weren't putting guys around him to help him succeed. We saw Christian Watson have a little bit of a breakout season last year, but after Watson, it was no one. And they traded away his dude and Devontae Adams. So it was just kind of a little bit of a wasteland for him in Green Bay last year. But this year he goes to the Jets, where he picks up one of the best young targets in the league, Garrett Wilson. He has guys like Alan Lazard. He's got Tyler Conklin in the pass game. Not to mention he's got Breece Hall and even shout out Pitt, Israel Abanikanda coming in as a rookie who's a little scat back that I think he's going to find very Aaron Jones-like in that offense. So I'm really excited for what Rodgers can do fitting into this New York offense. And he's my number 9 quarterback.
It's a great pick. Just kind of jumping into my rankings before we actually do. He's also my number 9 for a lot of those same reasons. It's hard to look at the Jets offense and say, I mean, all last year it was like this team just needs a quarterback, and now they have one of the best quarterbacks in the league, a back-to-back MVP winner not too long ago. And I mean, I love it. I think he's a guy who could see a huge season, and this season should kind of prove where he's at moving forward.
What I think is funny is, isn't he? You might have to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm trying to pull up his stats now as we speak. I think he's the guy that's every other year, or even years, or odd years, or whatever it is, he balls out, or something along those lines. So, I mean, if last year was the down year, then this year should be the up year again. So, I guess we'll see what he can do this upcoming season. All right, for number 8, I might catch some flack for this one, but I have Justin Herbert, the quarterback for the Los Angeles Chargers. I'm going to be honest. He lost a little bit of my faith last year. He kind of bumped down my list a little bit. I know he was dealing with tons of injuries around him, with Keenan Allen missing a big portion of the season, Mike Williams being out. I mean, at one point he was thrown to just Josh Palmer and DeAndre Carter. Like it was about as ugly as it possibly could be. So I kind of knocked him down a little bit because of that, and maybe unfairly so. We saw the Chargers go out and pick up another target this offseason with Quentin Johnston coming in from TCU by way of the draft. So that gives him Johnston, that gives him Keenan Allen, that gives him Mike Williams, all healthy. Gerald Everett had a really nice season, and not to mention Austin Eckler is a massive piece in the passing game. So maybe I have him too low, and maybe as I'm sitting here talking about him, I'm starting to think, oh, maybe I have him a little bit too low. But for right now, to start off the season, he's my number 8 quarterback.
Zach, I'm going to hijack your rankings, and I'm changing up how we're going to be presenting these just because
absolutely.
I feel like I'm going to be spitting the same facts and just like when I'm saying mine. So instead of saying your 5 and then my 5, I'm going to go down my list right alongside yours right after you speak yours, just because I have Herbert as my QB7. Again, love him. It's one of those guys that you're just like, I could see him being right up there. But at the same time, you look at those guys up there. It's one of those years where could be the year, and it could have been the year last year, but Herbert's one of those guys that is in a position to be a top 3 quarterback. It's just going to happen, and it's about when. And maybe that's this year, maybe that's next, maybe it never will happen. But I see him as like a really high upside QB7, where I have him ranked. And then kind of jumping backwards, just skimming down the list, just because we mentioned Rodgers. I have him at 9, but my 10, I'm jumping all over the place. My number 10 is Dak Prescott. I feel like him missing 5 games last year and finishing as the QB 18 and still having some phenomenal games last year in an offense that hasn't fully disappeared. I think they brought in Brandon Cooks as really the big addition, then they lost Ezekiel Elliott, which really just brings in more Tony Pollard and kind of boosts his passing game a little bit. So Dak is someone I have at 10 and somebody who I oddly at that rank feel like I'll have a lot of in drafts this year. And then, so 9 was Rodgers. And then my 8, kind of aligning with you, Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence, who I think you're going to be speaking on soon, is right there with like Justin Herbert. And he had a huge year last year. He was the QB 8. And I have him ranked 8 again, but again could have like a monster year with the addition of Calvin Ridley. It's just like another year in the system, another year being comfortable, and I should say like a functioning system, and not the Nick Saban, the what's
the
his
Urban
name?
Meyer system.
The Urban Meyer system that was just broken from the start. So another year in a functioning system should really elevate Trevor Lawrence and become a super relevant fantasy quarterback. So I have him at 8.
So as you mentioned, I was going to also be speaking on him soon. He is my number 7, so we're just pushing our way right up the list here. But I think the reason that I have him ahead of Justin Herbert is I was trying to look at the guys that I put ahead of Herbert and kind of reason with why I went with those guys ahead. And I think that they either need to have, one, the rushing talent, which we'll talk about with some of these guys that are upcoming here, because I mean that just sends quarterbacks to the nuclear level. You know, when you can run the ball effectively, that pushes you up draft boards immensely. But I think the other thing that I kind of see in Lawrence, but haven't necessarily seen in Herbert yet, and maybe it's because of Brandon Staley and the coaching, but I either need you to have rushing upside, or I need you to just have that crazy playmaker upside that we see with guys like Patrick Mahomes and like Josh Allen, who we'll talk about in a little bit, I'm sure. But I'm starting to see glimpses of that, I think, from Trevor Lawrence, but I'm still waiting to see that from Justin Herbert. I mean, we all have seen the arm. He can throw the ball from one state to another, but I haven't really seen that in game where he turns it on and he can just win a game because he is that big of a playmaker. Kind of how Lawrence did in a head-to-head matchup against Herbert in that AFC Championship game. So that's kind of in my mind what's the differentiating factor between these two, and that's what's putting Lawrence at number 7 for me. So, Kyle, I'm going to pass it over to you for 6.
My number 7 was Herbert. Kind of mentioned that already. Number 6, and it looks like we align on this one, Justin Fields. He was the QB6 last year after showing up mid-season. What was it? Week 9, he had the 40-point game, and then week 10 he had another 40-point game, and then just kind of coasted on that through the rest of the year. He was a guy who, I picked him up for a Josh Allen injury or bye week last year, and was stuck in the Josh Allen or Justin Fields scenario, which was an odd one to be in. But I mean, Fields, he gets DJ Moore this year. He kind of gets the chance to elevate his game again, or kind of stay on the same level that he was in the middle of this season last year. And it's one of those seasons I'm excited for because I'm expecting big things. I'm a Justin Fields truther. But I feel like 6 is kind of like perfectly slotted for him because I feel like these top 5 guys are a little hard to break out of the top 5, but Fields could very well make his way up there this year.
He absolutely could. And Kyle, you mentioned he brings DJ Moore in, and that almost worries me a little bit because last year the magic of Justin Fields was he ran for over 100 like 2 or 3 times last season, and those were those games where he just went for 40, 30 high 30s, 40 points in a game. And what worries me is like I know that this is terrible. I'm almost like preying on his downfall a little bit, but like I almost want the offense to not be better because he has to improvise and he's so good running the ball. It's almost like if he has a competent receiving core and guys that are going to get open, maybe he's going to stop running the ball so much. I hope that's not the case, but I think even if he contributes 40, 50 yards a week, I mean, that's still a big difference. That can push up a mediocre quarterback performance to a good, solid quarterback performance in a week. So I love Justin Fields. I think he's got a very safe floor. You mentioned DJ Moore coming into town. Darnell Mooney should be back and should be healthy the whole season. Cole Kmet there was a great connection going on there for a couple weeks in a row. They were connecting for a touchdown. I really like what's going on there. And maybe not for nothing, the running back room I think got a little worse this year with Montgomery leaving. Now we have guys like Roshan Johnson taking over, Deontay Foreman, Khalil Herbert is stepping into a full-time role now. So, it's the piecework mentality, and maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, and who knows? Maybe that leads to Fields becoming the running back one.
Who knows? That'd be huge.
Would be. Absolutely.
All right, into the top fives we go. As I'm looking at yours, you can't see mine, but this is where things kind of start to shake up for us, especially because you have this one ranked very differently than I.
Yes,
As my QB5 is Lamar Jackson, fresh off a new healthy contract, coming back from an injury, and just looking at last year, he was pre-injury the QB5 up until week 12, and I wouldn't be surprised if he returns back to that shape. And that's a very healthy and attainable goal for Lamar Jackson coming into this offense with new weapons. They kind of made an effort this offseason, maybe not to get the best guys, but to add some guys in the receiving room for Lamar, and to have a healthy Mark Andrews, who was also kind of on and off the field last year. He kind of steps into a season where things could look good. And again, I mean, last year he started off 21 points and then 42, 40, and it kind of coattailed off that in a couple like 20 and high teen point games. But knowing that Lamar Jackson can win you any given week because of a huge rushing potential game in an offense that, I mean, is improved. And I think he's a guy that I'm very comfortable with in my top five. I don't think he's going to budge outside. I don't think any of these top five guys are going to budge outside of this. But I'm very comfortable with him as my five.
I'm actually going to decline to comment on where I have Lamar ranked at the moment. I'm going to jump to my number 5, and I have Mr. Joe Burrow, Joe Shiesty, as they call him in Cincinnati. He is my number 5 quarterback, and I think kind of alluding back to one of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, I have him at 5 because I think some of the other guys ahead of him have that massive superstar trait or have that rushing upside, which is why he's pushed down a little bit, but I mean, you can't argue with the offensive system and just the overall production that you get from Joe Burrow year in and year out. He's like the ultimate safety blanket. You know what you're getting with Joe Burrow. You're throwing him in there. You're expecting 2-3 touchdowns a week. He's a lock for that week in and week out. So I feel very safe with him as my number 5 overall quarterback in my top 10 rankings. And he's a guy that I could see, when things get statted out and I magically end up having Jamar Chase catching 14 touchdowns or something like that, that he could wind up climbing up a little bit. And I'm like, oh, well, that makes more sense. But I think the real key for Joe Burrow is that his interceptions need to come down a little bit for me. He was averaging almost 1 a game last year. He had 12 last year and he had 14 the year before. So I just need to see him take care of the ball a little bit more. But like I said, he's like a lock for 3 touchdowns a game. So I like Joe Burrow. He's my number 5.
Yeah, and swooping right into my QB4 is Joe Burrow. He, like you said, a lock for 2 to 3 touchdowns, and that could be 2 to Jamar, 1 to Jamar, and 1 to T, or 2 to T. You've got 3 guys on this offense in Jamar, T. Higgins, and I mean Tyler Boyd is a fantastic wide receiver 3, and Joe Mixon can catch out of the backfield, and then you've got Irv Smith at tight end. Joe Burrow has like probably the best lineup of offensive weapons in the league. If not one, he's like 1.5, and it's dangerous that he can make it work too. Last year he was the QB4, and to have him ranked as QB4 just oddly makes sense, but mostly because he's a guy I'm potentially very excited to have on my fantasy teams this year.
Yeah, and I think we saw this offseason that the Bengals also made a concentrated effort to kind of bulk up their offensive line a little bit. We saw them bring in Orlando Brown. They kind of actually stole him from the Chiefs, which was crazy. But they brought him in on a 4-year deal. And then they also signed, I just had his name, I don't want to mess it up, Cody Ford, who's a guard and might just be a depth piece. But I mean, last year it was evident when that line got banged up, the Bengals offense struggled. So for them to have some backups and some guys that they can really rely on the offensive line to keep Joe Burrow upright is, I think, a really big deal.
Absolutely.
All right. Do you want me to do 4 next, Kyle? I'll hop into my 4 since you just gave yours.
Yeah, he was. Okay. That was my 4, so take it away.
All right. My number 4 is Mr. Buffalo Josh Allen, Mr. Madden 2023, 24, Mr. Madden 24 himself. Yeah, I have Josh at number 4, and I just I don't know. Something in my mind is holding me back with Josh Allen, and I can't exactly explain what it is. There was some news that came out today. We're recording this on Tuesday, June 13th, that Diggs was not happy with his situation in Buffalo, which really kind of worries me a little bit. If there's some drama in paradise, or what's the saying? What about paradise?
Oh, trouble in paradise.
If there's trouble in paradise between Josh and Diggs, that's going to be a huge issue, and that would cause me to probably lower Josh pretty significantly in my rankings. But for right now, I'm not going to overreact to June hype. I'm guessing it's just a ploy to either get a new contract or something along those lines, get a bigger role in the offense, whatever it is. But for right now, I have Josh Allen at number 4. There's no doubting that he's an incredible quarterback. He's super talented. He makes plays when there aren't plays to be made. And they brought in Dalton Kincaid, a wide receiver, tight end combination type of player out of Utah, who is supposedly going to fill into the slot role in this offense. So, I mean, that gives you Knox, that gives you Kincaid, that gives you hopefully Diggs. And I mean, there's still been rumors around DeAndre Hopkins swirling with Buffalo too. And I mean, that would be the type of thing that would push him all the way up to 2, potentially 1 for me. So right now I'm sitting at 4, and I'm making it a TBD 4, to be determined. We'll see what happens. That's going to be one that I will feel a lot more confident in my ranking come August 20th, the week before we're starting NFL football.
Yep, that's a very fine 4 for you. My number 3, getting into the top 3 here, Jalen Hurts. And I'll kind of say this, that personally, I think these next 3 for me, any one of them could be the QB1 this season. I feel like it's an even chance for all 3 of them to be the QB1. And that makes it a little trickier to rank them. Mm-hmm. But I'm slotting Hurts in as 3. He was the QB3 last year. He had a huge elevated game last year, and I wouldn't be surprised if it takes another step this season. I mean, you've got A.J. Brown, you got Devontae Smith, you've got Dallas Goedert, and then you add DeAndre Swift in the backfield with a little bit of Rashad Penny. It's going to be
Kenny G.
Oh, and Kenny G. Can't forget him, and I bet Boston Scott's still there too.
He is, just to screw the Giants over.
Just to score 3 touchdowns against the Giants a week. But Hurts has the offense. He's, again, like I said with Burrow, it's one of those offenses that the weapons are there to help him. And it's almost like you have to be a bad quarterback not to succeed. And I mean, we saw it last year. Hurts is incredible. If he can go the whole season, he'll be fantastic, and I expect him to. It's just I had a hard time ranking these three. So my heart put Hurts at 3, but realistically, I could put him at 1 tomorrow. That's just how close all three of these guys are to me.
I'm also riding with you with Jalen Hurts at number 3. I feel like he is extremely, extremely safe when it comes to picking or talking about these top 5 quarterbacks. I think with my next 2 guys that I'm going to mention, I feel a little more confident in them potentially finishing as the number 1 overall. But that doesn't mean that Hurts doesn't also still have a horse in that race. I just think Hurts is going to be, like I said, very safe. I also think there's a world where the Eagles take care of business in a bunch of games this season and are up big, and as a result don't necessarily use him as much. Now, of course, that's not a great reason to take one quarterback over another, especially when you're talking about top end guys. But I think Hurts is very safe. That's just kind of going to be my summary with him for the 3rd overall pick. He's incredible. He's got great weapons. He's got rushing upside. He's very, very safe to me. Now, my number 2, however, could, and I would say has a very, very good shot at being the number 1 overall quarterback, and that's none other than Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, you could probably put Mahomes out there with a traffic cone, a lawn chair, and a garbage can, and he's still going to somehow throw for 300 yards a game. Oh, and Travis Kelce, and he's still going to somehow throw for 300 yards and 5 touchdowns. I mean, he is just insanely consistent year in and year out. You know what you're getting with him. He is phenomenal at playing quarterback. He always makes things happen. Every year you want to doubt him, you just can't. So I'm to the point where I'm done even trying to doubt him. He's my number 2 quarterback. I love stacking him with Travis Kelce, who we talked about in our last video, but he's my number 2. I got nothing more to say. He's my number 2.
Yeah, man, that stack in best ball is incredible.
Oh, it's fantastic.
My number 2 here, Josh Allen. I mean, we talked about him. It comes with a slight asterisk as the Stephon Diggs situation hopefully doesn't escalate. But as of right now, it's just a question mark, and I don't like that. But for that, it kind of slots him into my 2. I think he's going to kind of stick in this 2 spot all offseason, just because I feel like Mahomes could be better, or I feel like Hurts has a better chance. It's one of those, like, I feel like Hurts is a lock for top 3 in my rankings and probably fantasy football as a whole. So, I mean, 2 feels very comfortable for him. But at the same time, again, I see him having a very, very real possibility of making it to number 1, and just very safe bet to stick in this top 3. Even though you have him at 4, I'll say top 5 so you can agree with me.
Agreed. Well, do you have anything you want to add on Mahomes? Because he's your only one that you got left. I'm guessing he's your number 1, unless you have him at number 12 or something.
Yeah, actually, I have Daniel Jones as my QB1. No, I have Patrick Mahomes as my QB1. I feel like what we saw last year with a similar cast of receivers and just offense to be the QB1 last year, I feel like it's not out of the expectations for him to be QB1 again this year with a healthier ankle. And the man is magic. And I feel like slotting him in or ranking him at 1 is the easiest thing you can do, unless your name is Zach Cole.
You know what? I had to swing for upside. And if you've been particularly sharp, we talked about someone a couple minutes ago that I said I'll talk about later, and that's Lamar Jackson. I have him as my number 1 overall quarterback right now going into 2023 drafts. And I think the way that I continuously wrap my head around this Lamar situation is, 1, he got paid. He got what he wanted. He wanted that big contract, and he got, at the time, the biggest contract ever, or the most guaranteed money ever. And I think that that's going to be his all right, time to prove it now. You know, that was his indication. This team believes in me, so I'm going to go try my best to win Baltimore another championship. The second thing that kind of keeps coming back around to my mind is I say to myself, I really like Mark Andrews. I really like Zay Flowers. I really like the Odell upside. But to take all of them is kind of a lot. That would be wasting a lot of my roster spaces or a lot of my picks on these different guys. So what better way to encompass a whole entire offense than by taking the quarterback for that offense? To me, every target that goes to Zay Flowers, every target that goes to Odell, who's the one that's throwing them? It's Lamar Jackson. And there's clearly been an emphasis to make this offense more dynamic this year, to make it higher scoring. Lamar is going to run the ball a ton. He's going to get into the end zone. He's a super big threat in the red zone for them. I just think his ceiling is extremely, extremely high. I mean, it's hard to say higher than Patrick Mahomes, but clearly that's what I'm saying here with my pre-draft rankings. But I love Lamar this year, and I'm trying to get him as much of him as I can in best ball, as much of him as I can in any format that I'm playing in at this point. So he's my number one going into the season. Again, he could move himself down, or Mahomes could move up, or someone could move up, depending on how my projections come out. But right now, he is my favorite quarterback going into 2023.
I love it. That is a great stance to take. And I look forward to seeing that your top 10 adjust throughout the season, throughout the summer.
We'll see. It's definitely going to move. It has to. It's as much as we would like to just set it and forget it in June. You have to understand that this whole process is very fluid. So,
yes. Now let's take a jump into running backs. The other top position here. I don't know what I was going to say attached to that, but next position, running backs. I'll start with my number 10. Bijan Robinson. I'm putting him at 10. I could very well see that adjust. I know a lot of the fantasy landscape kind of has him a bit higher than that. I see him, looking at Fantasy Pros right now, he is 4th. And personally, I can't get behind that. A rookie in an offense that is questionable, but who knows? We saw Cordero Patterson in the past few years kind of dominate from there. So put in a rookie with the similar and just as good skill set, and who knows? So my 10, Bijan, and that's just because that's where I feel safest with him slotted. But I have a feeling with projections going on that he'll slowly ease his way up into my rankings.
So I'll jump in with my Bijan ranking. I'll let you lead the way on this one, Kyle. I have Bijan at number 5. I think that he's just walking into a huge workload in terms of running the ball, in terms of receiving the ball. I think he's going to see anywhere between 60 to 80 targets this season, which he has the potential to convert into a ton more yards. PPR, that's going to be huge. And Arthur Smith came from Tennessee, where he just ran the crap out of the ball with Derrick Henry. So I anticipate that Bijan's probably going to take some similar format in this Atlanta offense. I think that's what Arthur's been wanting to do since he's gotten there. So for me, Bijan's my number 5 running back at the moment.
RB5. All right. So my RB9 then, Ramondre Stevenson. I felt like a lot of this offseason, as soon as they signed James Robinson, I was kind of fearful that, not fearful, but basically considering that was the roadblock for Ramondre to be a top 10 back. But now that James Robinson is no longer in the team, it is Stevenson's season. He had an RB7 season last year and is basically taking over this backfield as his own. And that's as long as Bill Belichick agrees with us. But for that, I'm slotting in Ramondre as my RB9.
I'm in total agreement with you. I have him as my running back 8, so we're only one spot off here. I think he was just electric last season. Nothing's changed. As a matter of fact, Damian Harris actually left this offseason, so his situation got a little bit better. I love Ramondre. I think he's going to be. I would feel great getting him as like my running back 2. If I were to start off and take, I don't know. I'm looking at my list of names here. If I were to take a guy like Derrick Henry at the end of the first round, and then in the turn there, if I wanted to start RB, end up with a guy like Ramondre, I think that's an incredible start to a draft. So love Ramondre Stevenson. He's my number 8.
My number 8, Derrick Henry. I mean, last year he was the RB4, and I feel like every year before that was another dominant season from Derrick Henry. Let's look at it. Last year he was RB4. I mean, year before it was RB21. Then it was 3-5. He's a guy who is familiar in the top 10, and I very much finds himself in a similar situation. He's going to be the focal point of this offense once again, unless they land DeAndre Hopkins. But either way, I think Henry owns this team. It is his backfield, and for that, I mean, dude gets it done on the ground, and for that, I have him at 8.
Everything you said, you hit the nail on the head. I don't really have anything to add other than he is my number 9. So we've got 8 checked off, we've got 9 checked off, and Bijan was my number 5. So those are my 3 that have been mentioned so far.
All right, let's keep going. My number 7 then, Nick Chubb. Kind of, I mean, he was RB6 last year, and I think this offense improves, and he no longer has Kareem Hunt to compete with goal line touches from him, which I never truly understood why they'd go with anybody other than Nick Chubb at the goal line. But for some reason, the Browns did, and now that that threat is gone, at least for the time being, Chubb is the one and only, I guess, primary back in this backfield. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity, a lot of touches, and it's just a few from, new opportunity folks who are keeping him out of that similar 6th spot this year as compared to last year.
Yeah, Nick Chubb's actually my number 4. I love Nick Chubb this season. I think the one major knock on him, and I definitely give you a ton of credit for putting him where you do, Kyle. He doesn't receive a ton of receiving work, but with Kareem Hunt gone out of the equation, he should see a little bit more. I believe, Kyle, you have to fact check me on this if you get a second here, but I think Dearness Johnson's also gone, who showed flashes as the secondary option behind Kareem Hunt and was actually really good in a couple games last season. You see anything on him?
Right now, it looks like is it just Chubb? Who the heck is in this backfield?
It's it's quite literally a whole lot of no one there. So that's why I have Chubb so high. He is the show. I mentioned before when we talked about Deshaun Watson, I'm expecting to see kind of a renaissance from this Browns offense, and a big part of that is going to be at the hands of Nick Chubb carrying the ball a ton.
Yeah, unless you see Jerome Ford or Dimitri taking a lot of touches from him. Those are the
Got to
two
watch
guys
out for
to see
Dimitri.
back here.
Yep.
Always. So I'll name my 6th player ranked here, and then I'll let you kind of go through your 6 through 10, and then we can continue on.
Okay.
But my 6th is Tony Pollard. He was the RB8 last year in an offense that he shared the backfield with, primarily with Ezekiel Elliott. I don't think he will still have. I don't think he'll slot into the one and only running back in this backfield. I think we'll see. I think he'll have a majority, but not a whole. And I think that was kind of the Cowboys' fear with him up until this point. I mean, we saw skills and flashes from him up until last year, but now this is his backfield. And he did really well with it last year when it was just him. And he did really well with it last year when it wasn't just him. So now that it is just him, I have him at 6. And that's primarily because I like the top 5 quite a bit. But I feel like Pollard is primed for a big year.
Yeah, Pollard's my number 7. I like him a ton as well. I think he's going to receive the ball or receive a ton of receiving work, and I think he's also shown that he's a very, very effective rushing runner. Running the ball. The one thing that kind of holds me back a little bit with him is he is a little bit undersized, and I mean we've never seen him be the feature back for a whole entire season. So that worries me a little bit, and he's coming off the leg injury. So that's the only reason that I have a little bit of apprehension, and that's the reason that I'm holding him down at number 7 a little bit. But I still wouldn't bat an eyelash taking him in the 2nd round of any draft that I'm in. So love Tony Pollard. Just to recap, Kyle, you want me to do my 6 to 10 here?
Yes, just roll through them and kind of highlight anybody we haven't mentioned.
All right, well, right off the bat, I'm going to mention one guy that I know we talked about, Kyle. You don't have him in your top 10, which means, spoiler alert, there's a guy in your top 5 that's not in my rankings at all, since this is my one difference here. We'll talk about that. But my number 10 is Najee Harris, running back for the Steelers. I think people are kind of snubbing Najee a little bit. I think he was far more consistent than people want to give him credit for last year. He's obviously Jalen Warren is there, but I mean Najee is still the main workhorse back in this offense. We saw a little bit better of a season after Kenny Pickett kind of took over the role of starter and was the consistent guy week in and week out. And you know, any offense, I think you're going to see that where the running back is going to struggle when he's being focused as heavily as Najee was last year. So I think that Najee's got a nice. I always talk about ceilings and floors. I think Najee's got a really nice floor this season where he's going to get the work that we expect him to get, and that's going to push him into a top 10 position for me this upcoming season. So I have Najee inside of my top 10.
Yeah, Najee was a guy I have. Again, he's in my top 15. So he's a guy who could very well shift his way into the top 10 once I finish out projections. And again, I think even I'm looking at the guy that I have ranked in my top 5, and he's very well someone that with projections could fall. But again, this was just quick glance. These are one of the guys I like, gut feeling kind of thing. But Najee, I mean, I've got zero knocks against him. I think he could have a huge year in an offense that should be a little bit better this season.
Yeah, I mean, he still eclipsed that 1,000-yard rushing mark. He had 7 touchdowns. Where we saw the big drop off from him last year was in the receiving work. The year prior, he saw 94 targets. This year, he only saw 53 and almost had 200 yards less receiving. Surprisingly, had 7 rushing touchdowns and 3 receiving in both seasons. So the touchdowns aren't a huge variable. But if he can get those targets back up, I think he's going to have a great season. And I think that if you can get him a little bit later, if he falls in your draft, maybe a 3rd or 4th round, he's going to be a steal there. So, but not to dwell on the fact too much, just to recap, I have Najee at 10. I have Derrick Henry at number 9. I have Ramondre Stevenson at number 8. I have Tony Pollard at number 7. And I think, have we mentioned this guy's name yet? I don't think so, right? Number 6 here.
We have not.
All right. Is he your number 5 by chance?
He is not.
Oh, all right. Well, let me introduce a new name here. I'm talking about Josh Jacobs, a running back for the Las Vegas Raiders. Jacobs saw a huge season last year where not a lot of people were expecting it. I think everyone kind of thought that Jacobs was dead and gone after his sophomore season wasn't too hot and kind of left him out for dead in this last season that we saw here. And he just exploded. He was incredible this past year. I'm trying to pull up his stats here in front of me so I have them. I mean, but he was just running the ball like a madman. He ended up with, 12 touchdowns, 1,600 rushing yards, and 53 receptions for 400 yards. I mean, everything you want out of a running back he was doing last year. He was incredible. His situation really hasn't changed outside of they got a little more stability at the quarterback position with, maybe a little more stability. We'll see. But they brought in Jimmy Garoppolo, who has been known to check down the ball quite a bit in the past. So that could benefit Josh Jacobs in the receiving game. I really I think he's solid. I don't have a lot more to say. I think he's super solid.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, I'll kind of state where I have him. I have him at 4. Again, solid was the name of the game. And I feel like kind of he will most likely, in my envisioning, be a larger chunk of the offense. And maybe it's one of those things like have a bigger role, but also take a step back, which is why, I mean, he finished as the RB3 last year, so I have him ranked as the RB4. It's one of those like the potential's there, and the touches are there, and it's just like I feel like 4 for me, slightly inside my top 5, felt comfortable to where I was slotting him in.
Well, and the thing that feels the riskiest to me last year, Kyle, is he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games over 140 yards rushing. One of them being 229 yards rushing. So like I could see that coming down a little bit. I could see that going from instead of being 5, maybe down to 3 games or something like that. I still think he's going to be great. I still think he's going to be over 1,000 rushing, I'll even say over 1,200 rushing, but 1,600 is a ton of yards rushing the ball. So like you said, I think he could come back down a little bit, but still be just as good as he was last year.
Absolutely. Now that that's your 6 through 10.
Mhm.
My number 5, we'll jump into our top 5s. Number 5, I have Jonathan Taylor. A guy who, I mean, last year was the RB33, but thanks to a few injuries in I guess a weaker offense, didn't benefit him in the fantasy world. But when he played, he was just fine. I 27. I mean, I'm going to list a bunch of numbers here. 27 points the first week, and then 7, 12, 3 injury, 15, 5 injury, 24, 16, 18, 13. So, like, in a sense of where he was drafted last year, you probably were not happy, and that's not someone to be excited about. But I feel like in a new or I guess a new offense, a new, uh, we've got a new quarterback. We've got it almost looks like a new team to me. And Jonathan Taylor, he's not a bad running back. I could see him just coming right back this year, fully healthy season, hopefully. And with that, I mean, give me a top 5 season from him.
Well, this is the one that we differ on because I actually
Yeah.
don't have Jonathan Taylor inside of my top 10. That might seem a little bit crazy, and I realize he's probably going to see a lot of opportunity with Anthony Richardson being a first-year quarterback in this offense. That they're not going to just pass the ball 65% of the time and just completely abandon the run game, especially with a rookie quarterback. But I didn't like what I saw from Jonathan Taylor last year. I know in 2021 we saw fantastic things from him, but I kind of need to see it happen again before I'm ready to trust this guy on this level. I think that the Colts are going to kind of take their lumps this season, I think, with a rookie quarterback. And I think that this offense might not be as good as people think it possibly could be. And for that reason, I'm pushing Jonathan Taylor down a little bit. I think that the whole offense is just going to need a year to grow under Anthony Richardson. Who knows if Taylor stays healthy and is able to find the end zone a good amount of times, that could return the value. But for me, it's just too expensive where he's going in drafts right now.
Fair. Totally fair. And it is healthy to have disagreements like this, Zach. So I'm thankful. Again, and then my RB4, Josh Jacobs. We kind of touched on him already. So, Zach, I think, are we ready to go into our top 3s?
I think we are. Just a quick mention, Nick Chubb was my number 4. So I think our top 3 are 3 guys we haven't talked about yet.
And I'm going to let you in on something. They are the identical top 3. So this will be easy.
Beautiful. Let's do it.
Number 3, we've got running back Saquon Barkley. I don't know how else to explain it. I feel like a lot of these guys do a lot of the explanations for themselves and what they've done in the past years. Saquon was the RB5 last year in PPR, and I love him. And to have him just slotted on your roster again this season, give me that. I feel like I'm going to say that for these next 3 guys, just because they're in such good positions and similar positions to what we saw last year. And we've seen them succeed where they are previously, and we're going to see it again.
I think the key with Saquon here, and I'm sure, again, like you said, the same thing will be said about these other 2 guys, is that Saquon is really a cornerstone of the Giants' offense.
Yeah.
I think that without Saquon, this offense is not successful in the NFL. And I think that that's really one of the major things that you need to look at when you're talking about these top end running backs is do they demand that giant workload that you hope a top end running back does? And I think Saquon definitely does. I mean, he's one of the most athletic people in the whole entire NFL. He's just a freak of nature. He can catch the ball. He can run the ball. I think we saw any of those injury concerns were kind of laid to rest last year. He looked incredible, explosive, dynamic, all the above. I love him. He's my running back 3 for the season.
Beautifully said. Yeah, I think being the cornerstone of the offense or being like a heavy piece of the offense is the big piece. Whereas this next guy, I guess these next 2 guys aren't 100% the cornerstone, but they definitely have a heavy part of their offenses. Mm-hmm. But number 2, Austin Eckler. the fantasy menace himself, because this dude loves fantasy football and plays like it. Man, I went into last year expecting some sort of decline, and that might have been a touchdown or two, or that could have been a bit less yards. But he went and just about improved in every statistic. Because yeah, in 2021 he was the RB2, and last year was the RB1. And last year he had 13 touchdowns, 5 receiving touchdowns. He gets it done all over the place. The only thing that I guess is a slight knock for him is a healthy receiving core, where last year Keenan Allen and Mike Williams saw time away, and hopefully that's not the case this year. But even if it is, I think he's still a huge piece of this offense, a huge piece of a team that's going to score points. And Austin Eckler has already proved that he can do it. And I don't want to doubt him.
Yeah, I don't think there's really any reason to. I think one of the most consistent aspects of Eckler's game is the amount of targets he receives in a season. I mean, that's something that can just push a running back into the next level. And for Austin Eckler, that's a lock is him to get the targets. I mean, I'm looking here at his targets the last couple of years. In 2022, he had 127 targets. In 2021, he had 94. In 2020, he only played in 10 games, but had 65, and then in 2019, he had 108. I mean, he's got 2 seasons. That 2022 and that 2019 season are both within the top 20 overall running back target seasons. So, I mean, he's just that's I feel like his safety net is that he gets those targets, and in a PPR style fantasy league, he's just money. He gets you those points week in and week out. So I love him, only less than the guy that we both have at number 1. So without further ado, Kyle, go ahead, take it away.
RB1's Christian McCaffrey. It's weird to think that a trade made him better or kept
Mhm.
him right on the same level, but going to San Francisco almost like was the perfect other landing spot for McCaffrey. Last year, I mean, week 7 on, he was the RB3, finishing the year as the total RB2 in PPR scoring.
Mhm.
And Joe goes into an offense that uh, I guess has question marks at the quarterback position, which just benefits McCaffrey. Um, you know that going into the season, he's going to be he gets a full offseason with the team rather than just kind of jumping into the offense. And with that, I mean, it's hard not to expect a huge season from him. Um, and I'm trying to temper expectations, but RB1 just feels safe for me, where Eckler and Barkley may or may not rotate between 2 and 3, but I feel like I can write and pen McCaffrey as RB1.
Yeah, I think as long as he stays healthy, he's locked and loaded. The guy in the running back landscape here. I mean, his target share is just ridiculous. I mean, I mentioned that with Austin Eckler, he had those 2 seasons that were in the top 20. Christian McCaffrey's got 5 of them. Like he's just the pinnacle of a receiving back. And if he stays healthy and can succeed in the rush game, it's just he's incredible. And in on an offense like San Francisco's, that they prioritize the rush so heavily, and they get the running backs, they get their guys the ball. They're important players. They get them the ball. So Christian McCaffrey is just he's got to be the number 1 running back this upcoming season. And quite honestly, I think he's the 101. I think the only other real case personally would be for Justin Jefferson if you prefer a receiver with that first overall pick. But I think it's got to be one of those 2 guys. They're just incredible.
Yeah, we're in a wide receiver year where I think the top few picks are going to be heavily wide receivers. But I mean, slot McCaffrey into any of those picks and you can be happy.
There's a saying, Kyle, when everyone zigs, you zag, or something like that. So if everyone's going receiver, who knows? Maybe this is the ideal year to stock up on running backs and dominate that way. So don't count McCaffrey out. If you're sitting there 101 or 102 and someone goes Jefferson, you're in business. Don't be upset.
Not at all. Not at all. All right, Zach. We've gotten through quarterbacks and running backs, and I'm thinking next week is when we tackle our wide receivers, tight ends. Just that way we're not making this a 2-hour long thing. We can makes it more absorbable for you listeners and watchers. But next week, count on us. Wide receivers, tight ends. We'll run through our top 10s there. Just kind of similar outline. We'll name our top 10s and chat about them. But that is it for this week then. So thank you for tuning in. We are First Seed Fantasy. Again, find us wherever you find your podcast at First Seed Fantasy or on YouTube at First Seed Fantasy. And then follow our Instagram or Twitter First Seed Fantasy, and like, comment, subscribe. Zach likes to see 5 stars next to the podcast rating, but if it's 2, that means you care enough to do that for us. So thank you for tuning in. Zach, it was a lovely week chatting fantasy football, and I look so badly to do it again with you next week.
Absolutely. I get fired up about those receivers and tight ends. So you're in for something special.
I can't wait to see what you've got for me.
All right.
All right. So thanks for tuning in again. See you next week.